The dirt beneath your feet has a much longer memory than the concrete poured over it. We live in a world of grids, neat suburban cul-de-sacs with names like Harvest Ridge or Oak Hollow, names designed to evoke a pastoral peace that we assume has always been there. But for those who grow up in these homes, there is sometimes a feeling that the grid hasn't quite managed to smooth out the past. There is a specific kind of silence in a house built on dead land, a silence that feels like it's holding its breath. This story begins with a move to one of those neighborhoods. It was a standard piece of property, a squared-off corner of a grid that used to be wide, flat farmland. To a child's eyes, it should have been a sanctuary, but for the witness in this case, their bedroom was anything but. From the moment they moved in, the room felt wrong. It wasn't a fear of the dark or a typical childhood phobia. It was a profound, localized discomfort. It was the sensation of being an intruder in a space that was already occupied. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, the American farmstead was one of the most dangerous environments for a child to navigate. While we think of the pastoral past as idyllic, historical records show that children were essential laborers, often performing tasks far beyond their developmental capacity. They fell into grain silos where they were engulfed by flowing corn in seconds, the weight of the grain preventing their chests from expanding in a slow, terrifying asphyxiation. They were trampled by livestock or caught in the remorseless grip of early threshing machines. And because these families often lived miles from the nearest town, they didn't always use public cemeteries. They buried their dead in private home acres, family plots that weren't always decommissioned when the land was sold and subdivided. The witness, around 9 or 10 years old, lived in the shadow of this history. The fear in their own room became so intense that they eventually retreated to their parents' bedroom, seeking the safety of the floor. But on one particular night, in that gray pre-dawn light where the brain is caught between dreaming and wakefulness, they realized they weren't the only child in the room. Laying on the bed, directly behind the mother, was a little girl. She was tucked into the curve of the mother's back in a spooning position, her small frame mirroring the woman's. So she was wearing a dress that looked wrong for the era. Heavy, perhaps trimmed with the kind of lace seen in Victorian funeral portraits. In her arms, she held a doll. It wasn't a modern toy. It was an old-fashioned glass or porcelain doll, identical to one the family kept in their own basement. The most chilling part wasn't the girl's presence, but her gaze. She wasn't sleeping. She was staring directly at the child on the floor. Her eyes were described as unblinking and dark, filled with a knowledge that no 10-year-old should possess. This aligns with what researchers call agency detection, the brain's evolutionary hardwiring to detect human-like threats in the dark. But for this witness, it wasn't a trick of the light. When they screamed and the lights were flicked on, the girl vanished. See, but the space where she had been felt colder than the rest of the room. This encounter fits into a broader archetype known as the attached child. In historical tragedies like the Willey family landslide of 1826 or the Lawson murders of 1929, children were often separated from their parents in moments of extreme terror. Paranormal theory suggests that child spirits often remain at the site of their trauma, seeking the maternal proximity they lost. In the Victorian era, this grief was so pervasive that families often commissioned mourning dolls, wax life-size effigies of deceased children, wigged with the child's own hair and dressed in their clothes. These dolls were weighted with sand to feel like a real child and were often kept in the home, placed in cribs or beds as part of a prolonged mourning ritual. As the witness grew older, or the activity didn't stop, it escalated. This is a hallmark of haunted people syndrome, where an entity attaches itself to a person rather than a specific building. Personal items began to vanish. Jewelry from locked drawers, a specific shirt with deep sentimental meaning. These items would stay missing for months, only to reappear in plain sight, perfectly placed in a spot that had been searched dozens of times before. Neighbors, unaware of the encounter in the bedroom, began to report their own sightings. They heard the sound of a little girl giggling in the backyard at 3 in the morning when no children were outside. They saw a figure in a white dress standing in the windows of the witness's house when the family was known to be away. It was as if the girl with the doll was still trying to play house, still trying to find her place in a world that had moved on without her. There is a legend in Ohio called the Seventh Barn. A farmer, driven mad by the death of his wife, reportedly murdered his children in the very barns he had built for them, burying them beneath the floorboards. The land was later parceled off and sold for residential development to hide its history. People moved into those houses never knowing that their kitchens or living rooms sat atop a site of agrarian massacre. While the physical structures of the past are torn down, the emotional imprint or residual energy of such violence often remains saturated in the soil. The witness's experience suggests that the girl they saw wasn't just a guest, she was the land's original inhabitant. The fact that the doll she held was identical to the one in their basement is perhaps the most disturbing detail. It suggests a form of mimicry, a spirit using a familiar object to gain access to the emotional space of the living. In the 19th century, dolls were seen as tools for gender socialization, teaching young girls how to be mothers and how to be mourners. It seems this girl never stopped practicing. Next time you are lying in bed and you feel a sudden, inexplicable weight on the mattress behind you, or you see a flash of a lace-trimmed dress in your peripheral vision, don't just tell yourself it's the house settling. Think about what happened on your land before the foundation was poured. Think about the children who worked those fields, who slept in those barns, and who were buried in those quiet, lonely pastures. Because for them, the farm never ended, and they might still be looking for a mother to hold them in the dark.